The Jump, an Ork Story by Tom Zimbardo. Josco was sweating as he entered Warboss SkullKruncha's drinking hall. It was eerily silent, dark and smoky inside, and the Warboss appeared to be sitting on his own, reading from an enormous scroll made of trampler squig hide. The Warboss was not actually alone. He had two of his mega-knob bodyguards with him. Both were fast asleep and snoring loudly, still in their armour.
"Josco,"
the Warboss barked, breaking the silence and causing one of his bodyguards to stir.
"Is that you? Come here."
Josco gulped and made his way around the tables and benches in the Warboss's drinking hall, dodging bottles, plates and the occasional drunken grot or attack squig that was feasting on leftover scraps of food. He was by no means a cowardly orc. As chief weirdboy minder, he was used to dealing with dangerous warpheads, but Warboss SkullKruncha had his name for a reason.
"Sit down,"
SkullKruncha commanded, motioning to a seat next to his throne of crushed skulls and enemy banners captured in battle. The Warboss was smoking his pipe again. Josco thought it always made him come up with strange ideas.
"Does you know what the problem is with most orcs, Josco?"
the Warboss asked him, giving him a penetrating stare. Josco's brain felt like it was seizing up. The Warboss had summoned him, alone, and was now asking him what the problem was with most orcs. Was it an obvious problem? Something that any orc should know? Or was it something subtle? Something that the Warboss himself didn't know, and that an accomplished weirdboy minder might have elucidated? Or was it a test? What if the Warboss didn't like his answer? Would Josco's skull end up amongst the others that made up the Warboss's throne?
Not,
Josco began, his voice betraying him, and barely speaking above a croak.
Not enough Decker? No,
the Warboss yelled with a disappointed tone rather than an angry one.
Well, not enough Decker's what you calls a perennial problem, but that's not the problem I is concerned with right now.
The Warboss was using long words again. Josco had no idea what perennial meant, but he decided it was best just to nod along and pretend he knew what the Warboss was going on about.
Now, the problem I'm talking about now is,
the Warboss continued, giving Josco a conspiratorial look as if he was confiding in the weirdboy minder.
Most orcs is dumb.
Ah, Josco replied, as if he immediately understood. He didn't though, and after a few seconds realised that pretending to understand might get his skull crushed quicker than asking what the Warboss meant.
"What's dumb mean then, boss?"
he eventually asked.
"Dumb is an umie word. It means not clever, not cunning." "Ah, like stupid,"
Josco interjected, before realising he had interrupted the Warboss and shutting up again.
"Nah,"
the Warboss carried on.
"Stupid is like really, really dumb. Like, if you think that Gross could reasonably be expected to take on an equal number of umie guardsmen, or mechs overpricing stompers, and then wondering why we never uses them."
Yeah,
Josco agreed, pretending to laugh. How anyone could think that the Grots were pound for pound as good as the Imperial Guard was completely beyond him.
"Nah, dumb is like an everyday level of stupid,"
SkullKruncha explained, getting into his flow now.
"And the problem is, most orcs has got no idea how dumb they is. Let me give you an example."
Josco had no idea what an example was. He hoped very much that it did not hurt.
"Does you remember when Lafla was juggling hand grenades, yeah? And does you remember when we dared him to swallow one?"
Josco nodded. It'd been one of Lafla's party tricks. Mork alone knew what happened when Lafla needed to take a dump.
"And does you remember when we dared him to swallow one, but to take the pin out first?"
the Warboss asked him. Josco started, his fake laugh turning into something real.
"There was bits of him all over the walls, floor and ceiling."
"Yeah,"
Warboss SkullKruncha agreed solemnly.
"That was dumb."
Yeah,
Josco nodded, stifling further laughter.
that was, boss, that was.
"It was."
The Warboss agreed again.
"Does you know what this book is?"
He gestured to the large squig-hide scroll he'd been reading when Josco entered.
"It's the Morgul's Book of Cunning Brutality. It's a collection of all the best and most cunning tricks what orcs have ever used. It is most definitely not dumb."
Josco nodded again, recognising the Warboss was in storytelling mode, so he just listened attentively.
"That's why I was doing all this reading. This book is full of cunning ideas and whatnot that other knobs don't understand,"
he said, glancing over at his drunken bodyguard, who was still snoring loudly.
"We's blood axes, Josco. We's cunning. The most cunning of any orc clan. And in this book I have found a cunning plan."
The Warboss smiled, revealing a jaw full of massive teeth. It was clear to Josco that he was very happy with his plan.
Does you know about the jump?
SkullKruncha asked him.
Oh, yeah, it does, boss. It's when a weirdboy uses war energy to send a bunch of boys through the war so you can get the jump on the enemies and give them a good crumping.
The Warboss took a long drag on his wooden pipe before asking Josco another question.
How far,
He asked.
can a weirdboy send orcs using the jump?
I don't know, boss. Across the battlefield for sure. Maybe as far as they can see?
That's right.
SkullKruncha replied, taking another drag on his pipe.
Only about as far as they can see. But it says here,
He motioned to the Morcar's Book of Cunning Brutality,
that if you get a lot of weirdboys all together, that you can jump the orcs a lot further. A lot further.
Josco sensed that the Warboss had an idea, but he had no idea what it was.
I want you to get all the weirdboys what can do the jump and bring them to me. We's going to do some experiments.
Josco nodded. Whatever experiments were, they were going to do them. At a range of 400,000 kilometres above the Terran equator, Midshipman Bryant looked at his radar screen. He was 11 hours into his shift, and only the dregs of cold caffeine in his polycrete cup were keeping him awake. A small freighter was requesting a holding orbit, but the codes were out of date. Useless assholes, he thought to himself. The Administratum had probably not updated their permits, and protocol demanded that he contact the freighter to check their status, cargo and destination. He opened a channel to the freighter, and brought on screen. It was possibly the oldest and most battered transport he'd ever seen. An old Mars pattern for sure, but whoever had repaired it had clearly not followed regulation welding techniques. There was scrap plating all over the ship, and in some places it looked like it used rivets to hold the metal in place. The Imperial Aquila looked awful, as if it had been hand-painted on by a child rather than stenciled on precisely and according to regulation. Whatever world this transport freighter had come from must have been one of the poorest and most backward in the Imperium. No wonder their codes were out of date, and the name was laughable too. A cunning plan. This is Terran Traffic Control Equatorial Sector 14.2, Bryant began over the Vox channel. Cunning plan, what is your cargo and destination? The airwaves were quiet for a few seconds, and then someone on the freighter responded with the most broken Imperial Gothic that Bryant had heard in his life.
We are transporting pilgrims coming to visit the Imperial Palace. Is there a problem, traffic control?
Bryant was about to respond when his supervisor, Captain Keneal, strode up unannounced. What's the problem, midshipman? Why the delay? We've got traffic backed up as far as Sector 16. We can't afford to dawdle. It's the code, Captain, Bryant responded, snapping out of his shift stupor. It's months out of date. Keneal looked down at Bryant's radar and read the security code to himself. It's an old code, he agreed, but it checks out. Let him through. Aye, Captain, Bryant said. Cunning plan, you are cleared for low orbit. Please head no closer than 50 kilometres and contact low orbit control for landing vessel clearance.
It's work, lads,
Warboss SkullKruncha cried in delight. Months of planning and experiments were coming to fruition.
Get ready. Once we's in low orbit, we just gotta wait until we's over the Imperial Palace, and then BAM! We da jumps down there, loots it, and da jumps back up again, before they even know what is happening.
The boys let out a rousing chorus of agreement, laughing and slapping each other on the back in anticipation. SkullKruncha handpicked a dozen of the most cunning commandos to accompany him on the looting raid. There was not a single grenade-swallowing lunatic amongst them.
Josco, is the weirdboy choir ready? Aye, Warboss,
Josco shouted, glaring at the 50 assembled weirdboys.
And has anyone else's head exploded?
The Warboss asked him.
No, not for 2 days now,
The chief weirdboy minder replied.
That's good.
SkullKruncha's plan had nearly been undone by periodic head explosions. The problem had eventually been solved by putting large metal buckets over the heads of the weirdboys to reduce their psychic emanations. But the presence of so many excited orcs in a relatively small Imperial transport was generating significant war energy.
Mech boys,
SkullKruncha yelled into the tortitude.
is the engines ready?
Yeah, boss.
Came the sound of the mech boy from the engine room.
Good. keep 'em ticking over. Once Mita jumps back with the loot, we's gonna have to leg it pretty sharpish. I reckon we's gonna have half the Imperial Navy after us, so be ready to go as soon as I says.
No problem, boss.
SkullKruncha had insisted that the transport be fitted with an engine that was half as big as the entire ship. That ought to get them out of low orbit fast enough to enter warp space and make off with the loot.
Okay then. Ready, lads?
Yeah!
Came the cry of his commandos.
Right, the Imperial Palace is going to be below us in a few seconds now. Josco, remove the weird boy's head buckets. Get ready to jump, lads!
Lucius Aurelius of the Adeptus Custodes stood in silent vigil, guarding the inner sanctum. It was perhaps the greatest honour that any servant of the Imperium could be bestowed, to protect the Emperor of humanity. Mere yards away from where Lucius stood, the God Emperor himself kept his own vigil, keeping the Astronomicon alight, guiding countless ships through the terrors of the warp, a beacon against the darkness of chaos, an answer to the prayers of the men, women and children of humanity. There could be no higher honour, or no higher boredom. Lucius had stood vigil for 372 years. During that time, Lucius had seen combat on exactly 2 occasions. The first had been a crazed would-be assassin, an inquisitor turned heretic who had barely had time to remove his needle pistol from his holster before Lucius cleaved his arm from his body with his halberd. The second time had been a high-ranking member of the Administratum who had taken the Emperor's name in vain. Lucius had broken his jaw with a single backhanded slap. For the rest of the time, it had been eat, sleep, pray and guard. Eat, sleep, pray and guard. Eat, sleep, pray and guard for 372 years. Lucius envied his brothers who saw battle alongside the Astartes and Imperial Guard, but that was not his duty. His duty was to stand guard over the Holy Emperor, and stand guard he did. Lucius blinked for a moment. He had been lost in a reverie, dreaming about battle and glory instead of fulfilling his duty. He silently intoned a prayer to the Emperor to ask for his forgiveness when something very strange happened. A small warp portal appeared directly in front of him, and a small, red warp fiend the size of a small child scampered through it, all teeth and chaotic energy. Lucius didn't hesitate even for a split second. In a smooth but lightning-fast motion, he levelled his Castellan axe at the warpling and put a short burst of stormbolter shells into its foul body, killing it instantly. For good measure, he cleaved it in two with the power weapon, before prodding its still twitching corpse in case by some madness of chaos the fiend was still alive. It was a strange kind of demon. 2 legs, big teeth, bright red. Lucius spoke into his helmet vox to inform his brothers about the incursion, but heard nothing but static. Something was jamming his signal. He looked again at the demon and saw something mechanical in its mouth. Some kind of signal jammer, perhaps? What could this mean? Using the blunt end of his halberd, he prized the demon's jaws open. It was some kind of signal jammer, but that was not all. There was also some kind of old-fashioned mechanical alarm clock, crudely wired to several sticks of dynamite, and half a dozen melter bombs. The alarm clock began to ring.
Kaboom! We's in, lads!
Warboss SkullKruncha cried as the rest of his team of elite commandos ran through the jump portal.
Ha ha ha! I told ya it was a good idea to send the bomb squig through first. Look at that git. Fancy armour didn't do nothing against the bomb squig, did it? Ha ha ha!
SkullKruncha held the former Custodes Castellan axe above his head in triumph, and 2 of his boys started stripping pieces of golden power armour from what was left of his body. The rest of the commandos looked around at the room they were standing in.
Where's the loot, boss?
One of them asked a few moments later.
What you mean?
SkullKruncha snapped.
It's all loot!
The commando looked at the furnishings of the inner sanctum with a look on his face that was not impressed. All around were tapestries depicting ancient battles, statues of humans unknown, braziers of incense and alcoves full of candles and purity seals.
Where's the teeth, boss?
One of the commandos asked him.
I thought you said there'd be loads of loot. Umies don't use teeth, you zugger. There's loads of our stuff to loot, though. Get the banners. They proves we was here. They'll look great into drink and all.
The commandos started to strip the tapestries from the walls, but it was clear these banners were not the best type of loot for them. SkullKruncha decided to tell them what was up.
Look here, you gits. That candle holder is made of solid gold, and this axe is made out of solid gold, and this armour,
He motioned to his feet.
It's made out of solid gold. And that massive chair is made out of solid gold. Custards!
Yelled one of his commandos, and immediately started firing his looted bolt rifle through a massive set of double doors, also solid gold, that had swung open. SkullKruncha blinked and couldn't open his eye again. The room erupted in a massive firefight as two of the golden armoured custards entered the room and started killing his boys. SkullKruncha aimed his custom mega shooter at them and let rip, but in the end it was one of the other lads with a looted plasma gun that finished them off, melted them right into the plascrete. By the time the shooting ended, all but two of SkullKruncha's commandos were dead, and SkullKruncha himself was missing half of his face.
See, I told you they was dead hard,
he told the survivors.
And there's plenty more where they came from. Quick now, lads, we's here for looting, not crumping. Get everything you can onto that golden chair and we'll jump out of here.
SkullKruncha's commandos gathered all of the loot they could, wrapped it up in some of the dusty tapestries, the ones that were not merrily burning after the firefight, and headed towards the giant chair. SkullKruncha grabbed another one of the custard's power weapon combi shooter halberds and used it to remove the heads of the fallen guards to add to his throne of crushed skulls.
Oi, boss, there's no geezer in this chair,
yelled one of his surviving commandos. SkullKruncha hurried over to the chair. It was at the top of a ridiculous number of stairs, lined by statues of old dead space marines and the like. The smell of incense was thick in the air, and as he approached the chair he realised it was a lot bigger than it had looked from the other side of the room. In fact, chair didn't really do it justice. It was more of a throne, really. SkullKruncha decided that he would definitely sit in this throne once he got it back home. The only problem was there were some crusty old umie gits sat in it, all wired up with tubes and purity seals everywhere.
Now time to move him,
SkullKruncha cried.
We've got to get out of here before more of them custards show up.
Defend your emperor, brothers! Came a cry from the double doors as dozens and dozens of golden armoured custodians charged across the throne rooms towards SkullKruncha and his last two boys. The commandos let rip with bolt rifle and plasma gun, but for some strange reason, the custards didn't fire back, choosing instead to charge him straight up the stairs, even as one of them was melted into the floor.
We boys, it's the jump time!
SkullKruncha sent the message to the telepathic weirdboys as the custards got closer and closer.
Free to jump up, and don't forget the loot!
SkullKruncha felt the war field rising around him and laughed long and hard as the closest of the custards swung his power axe through thin air as the orcs and their loot vanished.
Engines!
SkullKruncha yelled as soon as he arrived on the looted Imperial transport.
Full power! Climb and warp jump out of here as soon as you can!
The pilot pulled the ship out of its parking orbit and began a steep ascent, hurling the orcs, the loot and the golden throne against the back of the ship as it pulled at 10G acceleration.
Is any of them after us?
The warboss asked the co-pilot once he regained his feet.
All of them, I think,
replied the co-pilot, showing the warboss's radar, which was flashing red with hundreds of intercept trajectories.
Never mind,
yelled SkullKruncha.
Warp jump, now!
Their first hiding place was somewhere in the Sol System asteroid belt. There were so many rocks that SkullKruncha knew it would take even the Imperial Navy months to find them, giving them the chance to repair the ship. It had been touch and go as they first made their way out of orbit. At first, every Navy ship in the sector had started firing las cannon and defence lasers at them, and it was only some damn hot flying by the fighter ace pilot that SkullKruncha had recruited and got them out of there in one piece. After the first couple of minutes, the human ships stopped firing for some reason, but even more ships started to pursue them. Still, they had been very close, and although the warp engines had managed to make a small jump, they had to come out of warp space while they were still in the Sol system, as the warp drive was damaged by a las cannon hit. SkullKruncha was very pleased with his loot. He had tried waking up the crusty old human who was sleeping in the golden throne, but had not been able to rouse him. He'd asked his doc and even the weirdboys to take a look at the ancient human. The doc could do nothing, and for some strange reason, whenever the weirdboys saw him, they started crying and their heads exploded. It was then that SkullKruncha realised they had looted some kind of human weirdboy. That was good loot.
Where are we going next, boss? Back home?
The pilot asked.
Nah,
said SkullKruncha.
Running away is exactly what they thinks we's gonna do. Nah, what I want to do is go to Mars.
Mars?
Asked the pilot.
Why we want to go there, boss?
Because
SkullKruncha started to explain, as if to an irritating grot.
they has got lots of machines on Mars and good weapons and good armour for looting. And also because they has got a dragon. A dragon?
asked the pilot.
Yeah.
SkullKruncha continued.
Legend says they's got a dragon there. The Void Dragon, they calls it. And you know what dragons has got, right? What?
asked the pilot, looking even more puzzled.
Loot,
said SkullKruncha, and started to laugh again. The Jump was written by Tom Zimbardo and narrated by Sydney, off of The Drunken Ork.